the Chinese Communist Party managed to control eastern Inner Mongolia. I guess you are all familiar with this. Eastern Inner Mongolia is the eastern part of Inner Mongolia, which is a distinct region because it was ruled by the Japanese puppet regime Manchukuo from 1931 to 1945, and it was similar to Central Inner Mongolia under Soviet occupation from 1945 to 1946. This is its political center called Wang Yinsum or Wang Yimiao nowadays. Ulan-Hot. We can see from the change of the name is a transition from feudal religious feature to a communist style city. So in August 1945, young Mongols, led by these three people, established a regime in Wang Yimiao. So throughout the 4 years after that, the regime changed names for many times. It's initially called Eastern Mongolian Branch of the Inner Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, and later it changed the name to Eastern Mongolian People's Autonomous Government. And after they accepted the Chinese Communist leadership, they changed the name to Eastern Mongolian Branch of the Inner Mongolian Autonomous Movement Association. And finally, in 1947, they merged with the CCP organization to form the Inner Mongolian Autonomous Government. But the key point is not its name, but the change of its goal. Initially, it proposed secession from China and accession to NPR, which I think our first presenter also mentioned. And later, it proposed high-level autonomy within a federal China. That is, it wants to be a federal subject within China that has its independent armed force, currency, and legislative power. But eventually, it was incorporated by the Chinese Communist Party into the newly founded People's Republic of China as part of the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, which, as we all know, has only a nominal autonomous status. So this paper addresses these two questions. First, how did the CCP manage to convert Eastern Inner Mongolia from a borderland area aspiring for secession into part of a merely nominal autonomous region under its control? And second, why did the local Mongol elites give up first their secessionist goal and then their federalist pursuit, eventually complying with the CCP's agenda? First, I'll briefly review the CCP's stance toward self-determination and federalism. Nominally, the CCP had upheld self-determination as a Leninist principle. It tends to support self-determination when it operated in ethnic minority areas and relied on support from ethnic minorities. That's particularly the case during the Long March in the 1930s. And on the other hand, it tends to remain indifferent to self-determination when it relied to a larger extent the support from Han Chinese. This was also the case after 1945 when it was trying to gain national power. It had to prioritize support from the Han Chinese. This is from propagandist material from party officials. It says that although the party recognizes the right of self-determination, this does not mean that it is necessarily required, and it is unimaginable that when the revolution is about to succeed, how is self-determination necessary? And even when they supported self-determination, they were expecting those ethnic minorities who exerted the right of self-determination to found their independent state join back to China to form a federation once China itself is liberated. So to sum up, the CCP linked self-determination with class struggle. That is, self-determination is only acceptable when ethnic minorities can liberate themselves through building a separate country. That was the case of Outer Mongolia. And even for this case, the Chinese communists expected the ethnic minorities to join back to China after the entire China is liberated. That's why shortly before the founding of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong actually expressed his view to make Outer Mongolia so-called return to China. On the other hand, the Chinese Communist Party's support to federalism is seemed to be more sincere because Mao Zedong expressed his expectation to a federal China even when talking privately. And in 1947, Wu Lanhu, called Yun Ze at that time, the CCP's top Mongol official, proposed to the CCP to build a federal system. This is what he said. He believed that this is from an internal CCP document, so it's not propaganda. He suggested that future China should be a democratic federation, and each ethnic group can make their local constitutions and also organize their local armed force. But shortly before the founding of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong talked with the Soviet envoy Mikoyan that his party has decided that ethnic minorities should not be granted any real autonomy. So federalism under the CCP, even if it was realized, it would be similar to the Soviet Union, where it has only the form and not the content. On August 11th, 1945, when the Soviet army started to attack Manchuria, the Mongols in Gegensum uprised. They killed the Japanese officers, and they established cooperation with the Soviet Red Army. On August 18th, they established the Wang Yimyao regime. This is from that regime's declaration. It says that Inner Mongolia shall become part of the Mongolian People's Republic, and it shall cooperate closely with the friendly neighbor China. That means this regime itself does not identify with China. But the Soviet officials stationed in Changchun told them that it's impossible to secede from China. Possible reasons may include the Yalta Agreement, the Sino-Soviet Treaty, both requiring the recognition of Chinese sovereignty over Inner Mongolia, and also the Soviet Union may have concern over Mongol areas in its own territory. And later, as our first presenter mentioned, Professor Sen told those leaders who visited Ulaanbaatar that unification is impossible and they should seek cooperation with the CCP. So even before the CCP started to get involved to this issue, the Soviet Union, together with Outer Mongolia, had already pushed the Wang Yimyao regime to give up the pursuit for secession. So in January 1946, the regime identified unification of the entire Inner Mongolia and the establishment of high-level autonomous government as a new goal. It nominally recognized Chinese sovereignty, but did not acknowledge any authority of the Chinese central government. And also, it nominally kept Pan-Mongolian unification with Outer Mongolia as a remote nominal goal. As Professor Atwood once commented, this was in reality an independent state because it did not acknowledge any authority of the Chinese central government. So it was in reality an independent state which was voluntarily refraining from opening foreign relations and proclaiming its de jure independence because the opposition from the Soviet Union. So even though the Wang Yimyao regime was suggested by Outer Mongolia to seek cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party, initially they did not automatically side with the CCP. It's because, due to its Mongol nationalist stance, it wanted to maintain an independent standing from both CCP and Kuomintang. It wanted to stay outside the Chinese Civil War. And also, that regime consisted of Mongol elites with complicated backgrounds. Some of them are pro-Kuomintang. And finally, the Soviet Union had to advise them to seek cooperation with Kuomintang because the Soviet Union was bounded by the Sino-Soviet Treaty to recognize the Kuomintang government as the only legitimate government. So that's why when the CCP first sent officials to visit Wang Yimyao, that official encountered many unfriendly words against the Communist Party, and also he was continuously under surveillance by the Wang Yimyao regime. But the Chinese Communist Party devoted great effort to win the Wang Yimao regime to their side. This is a directive from the CCP Central Committee, which instructed the local communist branch that we must exercise prudence in the policy making toward Eastern Mongolian autonomous government, and not to let them be pushed toward the Kuomintang. This is also from internal CCP document, the opinion by Lin Biao, who later died in Mongolia in an air crash. He said that we should not voice our objection to the autonomous movement, even though the CCP did not support its principles. And he suggested that we should fudge the issue with the upper class while focus on the work with the grassroots. And finally, the CCP also managed to sever the contact between Eastern Mongolia and the Kuomintang zones, so that this may facilitate its endeavor to win allegiance of Inner Mongolia. On the other hand, the Kuomintang didn't eagerly seek Wang Yimiao's affiliation and post-military threat to it. Why they did that would be another paper, but here are some possible reasons. First, Kuomintang was in a relatively advantageous position in the initial stage of the Chinese Civil War, and also the Kuomintang was suspicious toward the Wang Yimiao regime's connection with the communists. So as a result, in April 1946, when the Soviet army was withdrawing, the Wang Yimiao regime reached an agreement with the CCP. So they abandoned the ultimate goal of secession and accepted the CCP's leadership. So to the Wang Yimiao regime, by giving up the nominal and unfeasible goal of pan-Mongolian unification, it can receive support from the CCP, which was important for them when the Soviet army was withdrawing and the Kuomintang army posed a threat to them. And also the CCP at this time had no significant organizational or military presence in its area. So the leaders of the Wang Yimiao regime may have believed that the CCP would not interfere with its internal affairs. And 1 year later, the Inner Mongolian autonomous government was established. In this way, the Wang Yimiao regime in Eastern Inner Mongolia and the CCP-controlled Central Inner Mongolia was unified. Western Inner Mongolia was still under Kuomintang control. So this autonomous government has the right to make laws as long as the laws does not contradict national laws, and issue currency and develop its own army. So it's a truly highly autonomous regime. So to the CCP, this move can accommodate the wish among Mongols for a unified and highly autonomous government, and in this way increase its influence over Eastern Inner Mongolia. As CCP documents shows that even though in 1946 the Eastern Mongols had already sided with the CCP still worried that if it does not pay attention to the Mongol national issues, the Mongols may split with them, and the Kuomintang would be able to take advantage of it. And then in order to unite with the Inner Mongolian people and resist the Kuomintang, the Chinese Communist Party decided to support the establishment of a unified autonomous government. So to Wang Yimiao regime, this newly founded, united, and highly autonomous government was exactly what it had been pursuing ever since learning that uniting with Outer Mongolia was unfeasible. But the only problem is the CCP did not have a long-term commitment to this real autonomy. As a memoir from a CCP official said that it was because the civil war was still undergoing, the People's Republic of China had not yet been founded, and the Central People's Government not yet existed, that this government could be a highly autonomous government. Once once the communists win the civil war, the thing will change. So finally, the party takes control. Since July 1946, the CCP did these three things. First, it secretly but actively expanded its organization in Eastern Inner Mongolia. and it secretly obstructed the development of grassroots organization of the Wang Yanmiao regime. And finally, it managed to exclude outer Mongolian influence. This is from internal document, saying that we must actively expand party organizations in Eastern Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, and provide simplified procedure for the peasants and soldiers to acquire party membership. And with regards to the Wang Yanmiao regime, here's what he said. In the agricultural areas, it should not have any organization, and only the agricultural association, which was controlled by the Communist Party, should be organized. And in the pastoral area, we should make it remain in the stage of preparatory committees. It didn't say how it was going to do this, probably any kind of sabotage also. And also, the party remained secret before 1947 and refrained from openly talking about the leadership of the party. It only said that the Chinese Communist Party is here to help the Eastern Inner Mongolians. And also there was a person named Ban Zraksh, who was dispatched by the Outer Mongolian government to serve as an intelligence officer in Inner Mongolia. He had frequent contact with the Inner Mongolian elites, and he incited the establishment of the Inner Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party. That means to resist the direct control of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party officials reflected with the Outer Mongolian authority about this, and the Outer Mongolia recalled him back to Mongolia. So in this way, the party excluded the influence of Ulaanbaatar. And also, after the agreement with Wang Yanmiao in April 1946, the CCP sent political commissars to Wang Yanmiao's troops and started to expand its influence in its army. By 1948, 20% of the Wang Yanmiao soldiers are CCP members. It also established a school to train Mongol cadres. So, and as a result, the name of that army changed from Inner Mongolia People's Self-Defense Army to Inner Mongolia People's Liberation Army. That is following the name of the People's Liberation Army of China. And finally, it was changed to the Inner Mongolian Cavalry of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. So in this way, Wang Yanmiao regime lost its own military force. This was also from an internal report of the Communist Party saying that the work to expand the party's influence in the army was carried out top-down, secretly, and with discretion. And we employed a policy of peeling the bamboo shoot that is to gradually cleanse and appropriately deal with those old cadres. And also, because of their prudence, even though like more than 150 top-level cadres were eliminated during this time period, this did not cause serious suspicion among the Mongol soldiers. In sum, the total number of eliminated cadres in the Wang Yanmiao's army was more than 8,000, which was approximately half of the total number of personnel. So the Chinese Communist Party greatly reformed this army. And finally, with a tight control in all levels of government and armed force, the only issue, like high-level autonomy, is already impossible, and the only issue is whether a nominal federal system should be maintained. Until August 1949, evidence shows that the Chinese communists were still planning to build a federation. But in early September, the Premier Zhou Enlai said that a federal system would not be established. His argument is that because the imperialist powers wanted to split China, and they hope that the ethnic minorities could be immune from this imperialist instigation. So we are not going to adopt a federal system, even nominally. This was probably because the CCP's overwhelming victory over Kuomintang in the Chinese Civil War. It was no longer necessary for them to rally support from the ethnic minorities by promising a federal system. And later, provisional constitution of the PRC ruled out any possibility of the independent legislation, army, currency, and so on. So these earlier proposed autonomous rights became impossible. And finally, without making any formal decision, the documents of the PRC started to refer to the Inner Mongolian autonomous government as the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. As a member of a CCP official said, there was no even any resolution passed on the change of name. Like opinions of the Mongols were not consulted. The party simply started to call this area Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. The conclusion is that the CCP opposed any attempt by any ethnic minorities to secede from China, and only supported federalism in form, but would not grant ethnic minorities any real autonomous rights. And shortly before the establishment of the PRC, the CCP reversed its promise and decided not even to build a federal system nominally. So during Soviet occupation, the Wang Yimou regime, by cooperating with the Soviet Union, was able to build a de facto independent state. And later, when the Soviet Army withdrew, by siding with the Communist Party, it was able to enjoy high-level autonomy. But during this period, the Chinese Communist Party gradually expanded its influence over the Wang Yimou regime, and its autonomy also accordingly gradually reduced. And finally, when the CCP established control over the whole country, the Wang Yimou regime was unable to resist the CCP's policies, and it was able to enjoy only nominal autonomy. So the Mongol elites were once able to build a de facto independent state and then a high-level autonomous entity, but neither could last long. Because of the lack of support from the Soviet Union, it had to side with the CCP. And because of the CCP's disapproval to real autonomy, once the CCP won the civil war, there would be no chance for any real autonomy. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, we're also very happy that all the speakers are holding very nicely to the time, so we have a lot of good time for discussion and questions. So, questions, please. Yes.
So, in one of your slides, you have Yalta on it, right? So, this is my question. Are you saying that the status of Mongolia, particularly Inner Mongolia, was explicitly on the agenda in Yalta after the World War II?
The agreement in Yalta said that the current status of Outer Mongolia should be maintained, and it depended on how you understand that. What does the current status, the status quo, mean? If it does mean independence from China, then it has nothing to do with Inner Mongolia. But if it means independence from China within its current territory, that means it should not annex Inner Mongolia. It should not expand its territory to violate the status quo. I don't think there's any explicit mentioning of Inner Mongolia. That's only settled in the Sino-Soviet Treaty. Yes.
CCP documents?
These are all published in the several decades later in the 1990s or early 2000s. I don't have any access to those classified documents. I really hope I could, but these are those that after many decades the CCP considered it's okay to be open to the public.
The archives?
Very limitedly, but those archives published some of the collections of documents.
Yes.
Could you comment on the role of women and any examples of leadership that
I'm so sorry. I have no much idea about, because I know that women participating in politics is a profound tradition in Mongolia, but in Eastern Inner Mongolia, this small region within this small time period, it seems that, well, Professor Atwood may correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me that there was no significant woman participation in the dynamics here.
Okay, in the back.
Language policy research, and can you say anything about language policy at this period? For example, in 1946, was there a Mongolian flourishing in this area?
You mean the language policy of the Chinese Communist Party?
No, of this autonomous group right here.
Oh, okay. That's so because my Mongolian is too poor, I relied on the Chinese language sources of this government, and it does seem that they provided all their documents bilingually. So the Chinese documents was always available in their among their official documents, because Eastern Inner Mongolia, even at this time, was already populated by a large amount of Han Chinese. Even though they are kind of separated, like most of the Han Chinese are peasants, not nomads, but the autonomous government controlled the entire leagues, the entire 3 leagues, and they had to appeal to the Chinese. And also, I think it may took too much time to find that slide, but during the establishment of the autonomous government in 1947, in the conference hall, all the slogans were bilingually in Mongolian and Chinese. And I also saw one photo from a meeting of the Inner Mongolia People's Revolutionary Party that included a Korean language slogan, because there are some Korean immigrants there.
Yeah. I should say also that there was a journal called Udlugu in Inner Mongolian, Uglu in Mongolian, and Halk Mongolian, or Liming, and copies of that we have. That I was allowed to copy copies that were in the hands of Jamsarang, Professor Jamsarang at the Oriental Institute when I was there in the 1990s. So that exists, and there's Chinese versions there are Mongolian versions, but from my cursory examination, the contents of them are not actually the same. So actually, for someone who knows both Mongolian and Chinese, it would actually be very interesting to do a comparison of that. I should also say, in terms of the vocabulary, they very quickly picked up on a lot of during the Japanese period. Mongols had developed a sort of modern vocabulary, which is a little bit different from that in Halk Mongolia. So-called Outer Mongolia, independent Mongolia, and that vocabulary was a little bit different from the Halk one. But very rapidly, already in this journal Uglu, they started to use as much as they can get of the terminology used in the Mongolian People's Republic. So, like, instead of Zasach to govern yourself, they start to use Zasach. They used to use Oksaten for nationality. Now they begin to use Undisten for nationality. Oksaten. So little changes like that. It's kind of interesting, but it didn't, as Anran has shown, it didn't last very long. So and they were under lots of different, lot of difficulties. Yes.
During this period, they were educated in Japan, right? Japanese educated, college educated. So kind of piggybacking on this language discussion, you mentioned there were maybe even some slogans in Korean. How about the slogans maybe in Japanese, or was there any usage of the Japanese?
I have never seen this kind of slogan, because they were like starting from the uprising, they were killing the Japanese officers.
Yeah.
So it's anti.
Right.
Oh,
no, but but it's important. One thing also, and this is a comment I would make actually for both your paper and also for Orchalung's, is that it's really important to remember that they were in a sense, the Inner Mongolian nationalists were in a really bad situation in 1945. Basically, the fascists, who were the most evil people in the world, according to everybody else, had actually benefited Inner Mongolia considerably. Inner Mongolia, under Japan, had gotten a much higher level of autonomy than they had ever had under the Kuomintang. So they were in a kind of difficult situation. They have to somehow preserve this autonomy that the Japanese got them, while at the same time making it clear to the world, especially to the Soviet Union and to the Chinese, that they absolutely hated the Japanese and they were absolutely totally anti-fascist and would never collaborate with Japan under any circumstances whatsoever, even though they in fact had for the last 8 years. So this was, I think that's also made them, this was, I think, a very important factor that made them very weak, because of course this is a problem, which is anytime they wanted, the CCP could play the Japan card. You are collaborators. You worked with the fascists. You are the bad guys of history. So it made it so Japanese slogans would probably not be good. Even so, yeah, so probably not. All right. I think so. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation.